Canadian newspaper columnist Christie Blatchford, inducted just in this most recent session into the Canadian News Hall of Fame, and for good reason. Over many years, decades in the business, working for many papers, Toronto Sun, Star, Globe and Mail, National Post, she captured the voice, such a strong and clear voice on, as I said to Laura McQuillan, the things that mattered to her: crime and justice issues, Indigenous rights issues, sports, dogs. We knew so much about her, but we're going to meet someone who knew more than most of us, close friend, and somebody who certainly has written about her beautifully in his own writing for the Toronto Sun. Joe Warmington is with me live. And Joe, a pleasure to welcome you to the program, although under the saddest of circumstances. Thank you for being with me today.
Well, it's good to be with you, and you know, it's obviously very tragic here, and you know, we're all reeling about it. It's interesting that we had this happen on this day. I'm actually at Tyendinaga, where this Mohawk protest is happening, and it's the kind of story that Christie certainly would have been here if she could have, and she certainly was consulting with all the different parts of these kinds of stories all the time. So I had a tear, really more than a tear in my eye when I heard the news this morning, because I didn't know it was that close. In fact, I emailed her, Heather, just yesterday for some advice on this. So, you know, it's
really.
I thought that she was going to be one of those people that would be like Hazel McCallion. You know, we didn't have Christie Blatchford long enough. She's only, I think, 68. I thought she would be one of those people that would be writing and, you know, doing the commentary up into 100 years old, and it's a huge loss for the country. Huge. Such
was the strength of her personality and just the person of Christie Blatchford that you knew so well. And yet we were talking about the fact that you are there in Tyendinaga, and had she been alive, she would have been there to write columns. When you read her columns, Joe, as a fellow writer, what did you find that was extra special about her work?
Well, I always describe Christie as taking the story and turning it upside down and having everything in your pockets emptied out, and you get to see what's in those pockets. And sometimes there were secrets in there, or, you know, whatever, and if there's, you know, some contraband or whatever, she was able to expose it. And she didn't care who she was doing that to or for. So, you know, I think that's it. That was her gift, and of course her writing ability. She's fearless. She was also the kindest person. But, you know, I always say about Christie, and I've been on both sides of it, if she's with you, there's no warmer feeling that you're going to be okay. If you're in a battle of some kind, which is in our business, as you know, Heather, it happens a lot. But if she wasn't with you, and I was on that side sometimes, you know, she would rip you. But it was never, ever to a point where, you know, the friendship didn't end there. You know, there was always, that's what made her so good, is that, you know, she understood the difference between friendship and the tough job that she did. You
know, even people who were others who may have been targeted by her writing talked about how, I mean, it was, you know, withering, her criticism sometime, for sure, but it was always fair. It may be strong, but always fair. And that was one of her hallmarks. Just looking at some really old footage as we speak to you, Joe, about her covering the Bernardo trial. When she went into the Hall of Fame just last November, she talked about some of the things that stood out for her. Bernardo coverage was one. Paul Bernardo traveling to Afghanistan to cover the Canadian mission, covering Terry Fox. These were all key things for her in her career. Is there any of those you want to talk about in particular, about whether having discussions with her or any of those coverage areas?
Yeah, I could talk about all of those things. I mean, a good guest for you to have on would be Bill Viggers, who was part of the Terry Fox run, and I can give your producer his phone number if you need it.
Sure.
If you don't have it yourself. He was with Terry, and he talks about Christie a lot and the importance of Christie to the Terry Fox run, because she was telling these stories when no one was. Terry became really hot when he got into Ontario, but prior to that, you know, Quebec and the Maritime provinces, it was, you know, there was not a lot of interest in Terry. Christie was the one that drummed it up. In fact, so much so that when Terry crossed over the border near Cornwall from Quebec into Ontario, the OPP were there, lights on, waiting for him to take him home. Of course, he got to Thunder Bay, which is a huge province, and so he was here, you know, for the whole summer. But anyway, that one, the Bernardo one. I mean, again, if it wasn't for Christie Blatchford, Bernardo's story might have been one of these things that, he may be out now. She was the one that really, really, she set the tone of what that really was, which was a national catastrophe. 3 dead girls, and obviously the whole Karla Homolka part of it. And I don't think there's ever anybody. She changed how court is covered with that trial. And then obviously right up until the last little while, she was always in the courtroom.
Yes.
And she was able to kind of capture the temperature like no other. And then
can I jump in on that? Just before we move on to the next, can I just jump in? I didn't know her nearly as well as you did. We shared a love of running. We used to talk about that a lot. I would see her at Olympics, and she was such a fierce patriot, and she loved those sports stories and the athlete stories. But I covered with her the trial of James Kopp in Buffalo, the man who shot an abortion doctor in Buffalo, Dr. Barnett Sleepian. And that was the first time I'd been on a story with her. And Joe, I remember, I've never forgotten this. She brought opera glasses to the courtroom. And she sat in the courtroom where journalists are assigned, and she watched through opera glasses the faces of the jurors and the lawyers and the accused and the family members. And I couldn't believe, and there I understood. That's how she was able to bring, the vivid detail and the humanity and just the life to her columns, just this incredible power of observation.
Yeah, it was, she covered the court like a sporting event and that's how it should have been covered. All the different players in the game, good and bad, good and evil. I sat with her lots of times in court, including Bernardo, but Russell Williams is the one. The thing with Christie, what made her so good is that she was just about to leap over, the glass and punch the person that had done the vicious crime, Russell Williams or Bernardo. You know what I mean? Like, yes. She actually felt it. She wasn't just chronicling it. She didn't have a detachment. She was like emotionally involved. And, all of us columnists, look it's not easy being a columnist. You get called every name in the book and then some. And she was. But at the same time, what we learned from her was that you're not there really for yourself. You certainly bring yourself to it. But if you feel something strongly, go ahead and write it. She was always on sides of issues that you would originally shake your head at. Why is she going down that path? And of course, at the end of the trial, you saw why. And she didn't always agree with people that she wrote agreeable columns about. But she felt that we needed to get some insight into things. So, this is a huge loss for the country. I'll tell you, I'm glad that you guys talk about her on CBC, because I don't think that Christie and the CBC always were simpatico, were they?
No, and she didn't always suffer television journalists very well either. She liked to be able to explore things in depth more than we can do in a television broadcast. So sharing time with her, I always thought, was a bit of a treasure, a bit of a privilege if you'd had conversations with her from the television standpoint. Can I just get one more point? Because what I remember, again, covering Olympics with her is she used to write about how every day she was sort of in tears at Olympics. She just felt the stories of the Canadians so keenly, and she, I think, felt real, Canadian patriotism at those moments. And you got the real humanity when she would write about her love of dogs, too. There's a whole other far less sharp side to Christie Blatchford that you would have been privileged to.
I've written about Christie and her love of dogs. And, the one thing that I wanted to say was when I went to Afghanistan, and I went there after her book was out. So I went in 2011. And as soon as I got there, I was at the, different places I was, all over the, forward operating bases and different places. And everybody had her book. And everybody that I ran into, I'm talking, infantryman or woman or military, leaders, generals, everybody, were wondering how could they get that book to her so she could sign it. And it occurred to me, this woman captured exactly the story from the point of view of the people that were writing the story, that were there, and they were dying there, and they were also liberating villages and helping girls go to school and all those things. Her book, 15 Days, is one of the greatest publishing, events, if you will, in Canadian history, because it was so raw and real. She was there for 15 days of mayhem, death, honor, all of it. And they really admired her. I think the military, and, you know, obviously I really think that they will feel this today because
Yes.
they love Christie Blatchford and she loved them back.
It won the Governor General's Literary Award in 2008, that fantastic book, 15 Days, Stories of Bravery, Friendship, Life, and Death. All of the things she wrote about, she touched or succeeded in to that degree. And Joe, I can't say how much I appreciate your being our first conversation on the passing of Christie Blatchford. You're going to be writing a tribute piece to her at some point, we'll look for?
Well, she wouldn't really want me to do that right now. She'd want me to cover this story here at Tanganega. There's going to be, you know, people have been asked to leave, and we're potential showdown here. So that's where I'll focus. I will write about her. I just recently wrote about the Hall of Fame.
Yes, lovely
awards with Lori Goldstein, and I was so proud to do it. And I encourage you to call Bill Viggers if you want to have some perspective of her in her, you know, full glory out there with Terry Fox. I mean, there's some great stories.
We will do that. We're going to be hearing from many people today and storytellers, and I thank you for your story, and may her spirit guide your coverage as you await whatever is to unfold there in Tyendinaga. Joe Warmington, thank you so much